June 26, 1942, Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. Air weight 47 hours. The M4 Sherman rolls to a stop in front of a row of senior Army officers, its engine ticking as it cools. Major General Jacob Devers stands with his arms crossed, watching as ordnance specialists swarm the vehicle with measuring tapes and calipers. The numbers aren't good. Armor thickness, 51 millimeters on the front hull. The 70mm main gun adequate against most targets, but already rumors are filtering back from North Africa about new German tanks with armor twice as thick. One of the British liaison officers leans toward his American counterpart. "Bit of a tin coffin, isn't it?" The comment spreads. Within weeks, it becomes gospel. Across the Atlantic, in the Libyan desert, German panzer crews are pulling intelligence reports from captured Sherman tanks at Gazala. Oberst Wilhelm Ritter von Thoma examines photographs of the burned-out hulks, their thin armor peeled back like sardine cans. He passes the images around his officer's mess. Someone laughs. Die Amerikaner haben uns Geschenke geschickt. The Americans have sent us gifts. The Sherman's reputation is sealed before most have even seen combat. By late 1942, German tank crews have a nickname for it, Tommy Kosher, Tommy Cooker. The British have their own term, Ronson, after the lighter company's slogan, "Lights first time, every time." Both refer to the same horrifying truth: the Sherman's gasoline, engine, and ammunition storage make it prone to catastrophic fires when penetrated. Crews don't talk about being hit, they talk about burning. In the officer clubs of the Wehrmacht, the Sherman becomes a punchline. Veteran panzer commanders who've faced Soviet T-34s and KV-1s regard the American tank with something close to contempt. The armor is too thin, the gun is too weak, the profile is too tall. It's a tank designed by a nation that doesn't understand armored warfare, a nation still learning the brutal calculus of steel against steel. SS Hauptsturmführer Michael Wittmann, already an ace with dozens of kills, dismisses the Sherman entirely. "Give me a Panzer IV," he tells his crew, "and I'll kill 10 of them before breakfast." He isn't joking. The numbers seem to support the mockery. The Sherman's 75mm gun can penetrate 60 millimeters of armor at 500 meters. The German Panzer IV's long-barreled 75mm can penetrate nearly twice that. The Panther tank, now entering production, has frontal armor 80 millimeters thick, sloped at an angle that makes it effectively impervious to the Sherman's gun at combat ranges. And the Tiger Y, with its 88mm gun and 100mm frontal armor, is practically invulnerable. On paper, it's a massacre waiting to happen. But there's something the German High Command isn't seeing, something that doesn't show up in armor thickness charts or penetration tables. While Panther production struggles to reach 50 tanks per month, while Tiger production crawls along at barely 25, American factories are stamping out Shermans at a rate that defies comprehension. Detroit has gone to war, the Fisher Body Plant, the Chrysler Tank Arsenal, the Ford River Rouge Complex, the Pressed Steel Car Company, the Baldwin Locomotive Works, the American Locomotive Company. All of them retooled, redesigned, and running 24-hour shifts. By the end of 1942, American production lines are completing one Sherman every 45 minutes. The Wehrmacht is about to learn a terrible lesson. In war, quantity has a quality all its own. But first, the Sherman has to prove it can survive long enough to matter, and in the deserts of North Africa, in the mountains of Italy, in the hedgerows of Normandy, that survival will come at a price measured in burning tanks and dead crews. The Germans are still laughing. They won't be for long. November 8, 1942, Beach Red Oran, Algeria. Show 6:30 hours. Lieutenant Colonel John Waters watches the first M4 Shermans roll off the landing craft onto North African soil. The tanks waddle through the surf like steel elephants, seawater streaming from their hulls. This is Operation Torch America's debut in the European theater. The crews are green. Most have never fired at a living target. Some have never even seen combat footage. Within 3 weeks, they'll be facing Rommel's Afrika Korps. The first engagement comes at Kasserine Pass in February 1943. It's a disaster. German Panzer and Tigers tear through the American positions like wolves through sheep. Sherman after Sherman erupts in flames. The crews, the ones who survive, stumble back through the desert with stories that confirm every fear. The German guns punch through Sherman armor at ranges where American crews can't even scratch the enemy. One tank commander, Lieutenant Henry Gardner, watches his entire platoon die in under 6 minutes. 5 Shermans, 25 men. The German Tigers sit hull down on a ridgeline, picking them off methodically. Gardner's gunner fires 3 rounds that bounce off the Tiger's frontal armor like pebbles off a windshield. The return shot turns his Sherman into an inferno. Gardner crawls out through the escape hatch with his clothes on fire. The after-action reports make grim reading. American tank crews are requesting transfers to the infantry. They'd rather face German machine guns on foot than climb into another Sherman. The British, who've been using Shermans since 1942, are pleading for better tanks. Churchill himself writes to Roosevelt, "The Sherman is a death trap." But something else is happening. Something the casualty reports don't capture. American crews are learning. Major General George Patton takes command of 2 Corps after Kasserine. He's furious not at the Sherman but at how it's being used. "We're fighting like we're still in the First World War," he snaps at his staff. Tanks don't duel. Tanks maneuver. The doctrine changes overnight. Sherman platoons stop trying to go toe-to-toe with Panthers and Tigers. Instead, they start using speed and numbers. 1 Sherman draws fire, while 3 others flank. They target tracks, engine decks, gun barrels, anything but the impenetrable frontal armor. They call in artillery. They coordinate with tank destroyers. They wait for infantry to spot enemy positions before advancing. At El Gueter in March 1943, an American Sherman company faces a German counterattack. Instead of charging forward, they hull down behind a ridge and wait. When the panzers advance, the Shermans retreat, drawing the Germans into a kill zone covered by hidden anti-tank guns and artillery. 10 German tanks are destroyed without the Shermans firing a shot. The crews start calling it the Sherman Shuffle, shoot and scoot, never stay still, never fight fair. And then there's the factor nobody anticipated, the Sherman's crew survivability. When a Panther or Tiger is penetrated, the crew usually dies. The internal layout is cramped. The ammunition is poorly stored. There's often only 1 escape hatch. German tank crews have a saying, "Der erste Treffer ist der letzte Treffer." The first hit is the last hit. But the Sherman has escape hatches everywhere. The ammunition is stored below the turret basket in water-filled racks. The crew compartment is relatively spacious. When a Sherman is hit, the crew has a fighting chance to bail out before the ammunition cooks off. Lieutenant Gardner, the officer who lost his entire platoon at Kasserine, climbs into another Sherman 3 weeks later, and another after that. By the end of the North African campaign, he's been knocked out 5 times. He's still alive. Experienced crews are the most valuable resource in armored warfare. The Germans are burning through theirs. The Americans are recycling theirs. By May 1943, when the Africa Corps surrenders in Tunisia, American tank crews have learned what the Sherman actually is, not a superweapon, but a tool. Used properly in numbers with combined arm support, it's deadly. The question is whether they can apply those lessons against the Wehrmacht's best. The answer is coming. In the hedgerows of Normandy, in the forests of the Ardennes, in the streets of German cities, the Sherman is about to stop being the underdog. June 6, 1944, Omaha Beach, Normandy, 07:30 hours. The first wave is dying in the surf. Bodies tumble in the waves. Wounded men scream for medics who can't reach them. German machine guns rake the beach from concrete bunkers that naval bombardment barely scratched. The entire invasion teeters on the edge of catastrophic failure. Then the Shermans arrive. DD tanks duplex drive. Shermans fitted with flotation screens are supposed to swim ashore ahead of the infantry. Most sink in the rough seas, but the few that make it become anchors of survival. One Sherman, commanded by Sergeant Johnny Stevens, grinds up the beach with water still pouring from its engine deck. Stevens doesn't wait for orders. He aims his 75 millibers at the nearest pillbox and fires. The concrete cracks, doesn't penetrate. He fires again and again, 6 rounds into the same spot until the embrasure collapses inward. The machine gun goes silent. Infantrymen rally behind his tank. They advance 50 yards, then 100. By nightfall, 2,400 Shermans are ashore across all 5 beaches. Not because they're invincible, because there are so many of them. The German defenders have never seen anything like it. Oberst Fritz Siegelmann, Chief of Staff of the 352nd Infantry Division, watches from his command post as American armor pours inland. They just keep coming, he tells his aide. We destroy 10, and 20 more appear. This is the reality the Wehrmacht is beginning to grasp. America isn't trying to build a better tank. America is building an unstoppable tide of acceptable tanks. By mid-June, the bocage country of Normandy becomes a killing field. The hedgerows, ancient earthen walls topped with thick vegetation, turn every field into a fortress. German Panther and Tiger tanks ambush Shermans from concealed positions. The Americans lose 3, sometimes 4 tanks for every German tank destroyed. But the math is brutally simple. The Germans can't replace their losses. The Americans can. When a German Panther is knocked out, it takes weeks to get a replacement if one's available at all. When a Sherman is destroyed, another rolls off a landing ship within days, sometimes hours. The beaches are choked with replacement vehicles. Supply officers joke that you can't walk 50 feet without tripping over a spare Sherman. The crews notice something else. The tank keeps getting better. In July, new Shermans arrive with upgraded armor applique plates welded to the hull. Then come Shermans with rhino hedgerow cutters, steel tusks welded to the bow that let them punch through the bocage walls instead of climbing over them. In August, the first Easy 8 Shermans appear, with improved suspension and a more powerful 76mm gun that can finally threaten German heavy armor at reasonable ranges. The Germans are still fielding Panthers and Tigers from 1943. The Sherman is evolving. Staff Sergeant Lafayette Poole becomes a legend in the 3rd Armored Division. His Sherman, nicknamed In the Mood, racks up 258 confirmed kills tanks, vehicles, artillery pieces, fortifications. He's knocked out 3 times. Each time, he gets a new Sherman and keeps fighting. By September, he's been in combat for 81 consecutive days. German tank ace Ernst Barkmann, an SS Oberscharführer with dozens of kills, describes facing American armor in his memoir. We could win every battle and still lose the war. For every Panther we fielded, they had 20 Shermans. For every Tiger, 50. We were drowning in them. The Wehrmacht's armored reserves are being ground down. At Mortain in August, German forces launch Operation Lüttich, a desperate counterattack, to cut off the American breakthrough. They commit 2 panzer divisions, 120 tanks, including 30 Panthers and Tigers. The Americans meet them with over 300 Shermans, plus tank destroyers, artillery, and air support. The battle lasts 6 days. The Germans lose 100 tanks. The Americans lose twice that many. But the Americans replace their losses in a week. The Germans never recover theirs. By late August, the Falaise Pocket closes. Trapped German forces, including the remnants of 3 panzer divisions, are annihilated. The roads are choked with destroyed vehicles. American tankers drive past burning Panthers and Tigers that ran out of fuel trying to escape. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, who will later have America's next main battle tank named after him, leads a Sherman column through the wreckage. He radios back to division. They're not laughing anymore. The race across France begins. Patton's Third Army covers 600 miles in 30 days, the fastest armored advance in military history. The Shermans prove what they were actually designed for, not dueling Tigers in open fields, but exploitation, maneuver, speed, overwhelming presence. The Germans are in full retreat, but winter is coming, and in the forests of the Ardennes, they're preparing one final desperate counterattack. The Sherman's greatest test is still ahead. December 16th, 1944, Bastogne, Belgium, so 5:30 hours. The fog is thick enough to choke on. Corporal James Hendricks sits in his Sherman, turret hatch open, listening. Something's wrong. The forest is too quiet. No birds, no wind. Just silence pressing down like a held breath. Then the world explodes. German artillery tears through the American lines, hundreds of guns firing simultaneously. Operation Wacht and Rhine Watch on the Rhine has begun. Hitler's last gamble. 25 divisions, 200,000 men. Over 1,400 tanks and assault guns, including entire battalions of King Tigers, the most powerful tanks ever built. The plan is audacious. Punch through the Ardennes, seize the fuel dumps at Liège, drive to Antwerp, and split the Allied armies in half. It almost works. The German spearheads smash through thinly held American positions. Entire companies are overrun before they can call for help. In the chaos, SS Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper's battle group, equipped with King Tigers and Panthers, drives 50 miles into American territory in 2 days. They massacre American prisoners at Malmedy. They crush roadblocks. They seem unstoppable. But the weather that grounded Allied aircraft also slows the German advance. The narrow forest roads become choked with vehicles. Fuel supplies the entire operation depends on captured American fuel fail to materialize. And everywhere paper turns, there are Shermans. Not better tanks, just more tanks. At Stavelot, 3 Shermans from the 740th Tank Battalion face Pieper's vanguard. They're outnumbered 10-1. Their 75mm guns can barely scratch a King Tiger. They fight anyway. They block the bridge. They force Pieper to find another route. Those 3 hours of delay are enough for American engineers to blow fuel dumps and evacuate critical supplies. Pieper will run out of fuel 15 miles from his objective. At Bastogne, the 101st Airborne is surrounded. German panzers circle the town like wolves. On December 22nd, German officers deliver an ultimatum: surrender or be annihilated. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe's response becomes legend. Nuts. He can afford the bravado. Patton's Third Army is coming, and Patton is bringing Shermans. December 26th. The weather breaks. Fighter-bombers fill the sky. Patton's 4th Armored Division drives north through a blizzard 37 miles in 19 hours over ice-covered roads. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams leads the vanguard. His Sherman column doesn't stop for anything. They bypass German strong points. They shoot up supply columns. They drive straight through the night. At 16:45 hours, Abrams's Shermans smash through the German lines surrounding Bastogne. The siege is broken. But the battle isn't over. In the villages and forests around Bastogne, Sherman crews face the best tanks Germany can field. At Celle, the 2nd Panzer Division, running on fumes and desperation, is caught in the open by American armor. Shermans encircle the German column. It's not a duel, it's an execution. Staff Sergeant Early Poor's Sherman takes on a Panther at point-blank range less than 50 yards. His 76mm gun punches through the Panther's side armor. The German tank explodes so violently the turret flies 30 feet into the air. Poor doesn't celebrate. There are more targets. By nightfall, the 2nd Panzer Division ceases to exist as a fighting force. 82 German tanks destroyed or abandoned. The spearhead is broken. The numbers tell the story. In 6 weeks of fighting, the Germans lose 800 tanks and assault guns. The Americans lose over 700 Shermans. But by January, American tank strength is back to pre-battle levels. The German armored force never recovers. A captured panzer officer is interrogated by American intelligence. "How many tanks do you have left?" they ask. "Enough to fight," he says, "not enough to win." "How many do we have?" He laughs bitterly. "All of them." The Battle of the Bulge breaks more than German armor. It breaks the myth that superior technology wins wars. The King Tiger has 150 kilometers of frontal armor and an 8-kilometer gun that can kill a Sherman at 2,000 meters. It's a masterpiece of engineering. It's also slow, mechanical, unreliable, and exists in numbers too small to matter. Only 489 King Tigers are ever built. America produces 49,234 Shermans. The Sherman crews understand what they're riding. Not the best tank, but the best tank for the job they're asked to do. It's reliable. It's maintainable. It's everywhere. When it burns, and it still burns, another one appears to take its place. By February 1945, the Rhine River is within reach. The German border is crumbling, and Sherman columns are preparing for the final push into the heart of the Third Reich. The tank the Germans mocked in 1942 is about to drive through the streets of Berlin. March 7, 1945, Remagen, Germany, 15-20 hours. Sergeant Alex Drabik sprints across the Ludendorff Bridge, bullets snapping past his head. Behind him, Shermans from the 14th Tank Battalion inch forward, their tracks grinding on steel. The bridge, one of the last intact crossings over the Rhine, is rigged with demolition charges. German engineers are frantically trying to detonate them. The charges fail. By nightfall, an entire American armored division is across. The Rhine, Germany's last natural barrier, has been breached. Within 24 hours, engineers are laying pontoon bridges on either side of Remagen. Shermans cross in endless columns, their engines roaring like thunder. The floodgates have opened. What follows isn't a battle, it's a pursuit, a collapse, a reckoning. American armored columns fan out across western Germany, moving so fast that German units surrender without firing a shot. They simply can't retreat faster than the Shermans advance. Towns that took weeks to capture in Normandy fall in hours. Supply lines stretch to breaking point, but the Shermans' mechanical reliability means most tanks keep running on minimal maintenance. The German defenders are a shadow of what they were. The Panthers and Tigers that terrorized Allied tankers in 1944 are gone destroyed, abandoned, or out of fuel. What's left are obsolete Panzer V's, converted Czech tanks, and desperate Volkssturm militia with Panzerfausts. They fight, they die. The Shermans keep rolling. Lieutenant Colonel William Lovelady's task force covers 73 miles in a single day, a record that stands for decades. His Shermans bypass German strongpoints, leaving them for infantry to mop up. When they encounter resistance, they don't slow down. They call in airstrikes and artillery, then drive through the smoke. At Paderborn, the 3rd Armored Division encircles an entire SS Panzer training facility. The cadets, some as young as 17, are equipped with the newest King Tigers straight from the factory. They've never seen combat. They meet Sherman crews who've been fighting for 2 years. The battle lasts 3 days. The Germans lose 105 tanks. Most are destroyed by airstrikes or abandoned when they run out of fuel. The Sherman crews barely slow down. Staff Sergeant Lafayette Poole, the ace with over 250 kills, doesn't live to see Germany surrender. On September 19, 1944, a German shell finally catches him. He loses a leg, but survives. His replacement, Sergeant Wilbur Richards, takes over in the mood and keeps fighting. The tank survives the war. By April, Sherman columns are approaching the Elbe River, the agreed-upon meeting point with Soviet forces. On April 25th, near Torgau, Lieutenant Albert Kotzebue's reconnaissance platoon encounters Red Army soldiers. They shake hands, they share rations, they take photographs. The Germans are surrounded. In the rubble of Berlin, Reichsminister of Armaments Albert Speer surveys production reports. Germany produced 6,000 Panther tanks during the entire war, quality machines, engineering marvels. It wasn't enough. The Americans produced 49,000 Shermans. The Soviets produced 57,000 T-34s. The British added thousands more Churchill and Cromwell tanks. The Axis drowned in steel. Speer writes in his diary, "We built the finest weapons in the world. They built more than we could destroy." The Shermans' final tally is staggering. Over 49,234 produced, deployed in every theater Europe, North Africa, the Pacific, Italy. Used by American, British, Canadian, French, Polish, and Soviet forces. It fought in every major battle from 1942 to 1945 and continued serving in armies around the world for decades after. Was it the best tank of World War II? No. The Panther had better armor and firepower. The T-34 was more innovative. The Tiger was more feared. But the Sherman won. It won because it could be mass-produced by industries that also built cars, locomotives, and refrigerators. It won because its crews could be trained in months, not years. It won because when it broke down, any mechanic with basic tools could fix it. It won because when it burned, the crew usually survived to fight another day. Most importantly, it won because it was there everywhere, in numbers too vast to comprehend, backed by industrial capacity that turned warfare into mathematics. The Germans built 6,000 Panthers over 3 years. American factories built 1,600 Shermans per month at peak production. By May 8, 1945, when Germany surrenders, Sherman tanks are parked in every major German city, in Munich, in Frankfurt, in Hamburg. Veterans of the Africa Corps, the ones who survived, walk past American tank parks and see row after row of Shermans stretching to the horizon. Some still remember when they laughed at the Tommyknocker, when they dismissed it as a tin coffin, when they thought superior German engineering would carry the day. They learned what Staff Sergeant Early Poor could have told them in 1942. It's not about having the best tank. It's about having enough good tanks to be everywhere the enemy isn't expecting you. The Sherman wasn't a superweapon. It was something far more dangerous. It was inevitable. September 2, 1945, Tokyo Bay, Japan. 108 hours. General Douglas MacArthur signs the Japanese surrender aboard the USS Missouri. On the deck below, members of the 1st Cavalry Division stand at attention tankers who fought across the Pacific in Shermans adapted for island warfare. The war is over, but the Shermans' war is just beginning. Within months of Germany's surrender, new enemies emerge. The Cold War ignites. The Sherman designed to defeat Nazi panzers finds itself facing Soviet T-34s in proxy wars across the globe, in Korea, in the Middle East, in conflicts most Americans will never hear about. June 25, 1950, the 38th parallel, Korea. North Korean T-34-85 tanks pour across the border, smashing through South Korean defenses. The United States scrambles to respond. The newest American tank, the M26 Pershing, exists in limited numbers, so they send what they have, Shermans. The 87nd Medium Tank Battalion arrives at Pusan with M4A3E8 Easy 8 Shermans, upgraded models with 70-56 mm guns and improved suspension. On July 17th, near Taijon, they meet North Korean T-34s for the first time. The engagement is brutal. The T-34's 80 gun outclasses the Sherman's 76 mm. Soviet armor doctrine is aggressive, well-practiced. But the Sherman crews are veterans. Many fought in Europe. They know every trick. Sergeant First Class Ernest Kuma commands a platoon of Easy 8s. When 6 T-34s attack his position, he doesn't retreat. He maneuvers, uses terrain, targets tracks and engine decks. In 9 hours of fighting, his platoon destroys all 6 T-34s. Kuma personally accounts for 4. He receives the Medal of Honor. By 1951, American and UN forces are pushing the North Koreans back. Shermans spearhead the advance not because they're superior to the T-34, but because there are enough of them, and because their crews have learned that warfare isn't about vehicle specifications. It's about combined arms, logistics, and the will to adapt. The Sherman serves throughout the Korean War. Some are still in service when the armistice is signed in 1953. But Korea is just one theater. The Sherman story sprawls across continents. In 1948, Israel declares independence. The surrounding Arab nations attack with armored British-supplied tanks, captured German vehicles, and a hodgepodge of armored cars. Israel has almost nothing. Then someone discovers a cache of surplus Shermans in European scrapyards. They're bought for pennies, smuggled across the Mediterranean, rebuilt in secret workshops. Israeli tankers name them Super Shermans. They upgrade the guns first to 75 mm, then to French 105 mm cannons. They modify the engines. They weld on additional armor. The Sherman that American crews abandoned in 1945 becomes the backbone of Israeli armored forces. In the 1956 Suez Crisis, Israeli Shermans face Egyptian T-34s and Soviet-supplied armor. In the Six-Day War of 1967, Upgraded Super Shermans fight alongside newer British Centurions and American M48 Pattons. Some remain in reserve units into the 1970s, 30 years after they rolled off American assembly lines. In South America, Shermans serve with Chilean, Argentine, and Brazilian armies well into the 1980s. In Southeast Asia, they fight in the Chinese Civil War, the Indo-Pakistani Wars, and dozens of smaller conflicts. Wherever there's a battle, somewhere there's a Sherman. The tank that German panzer crews mocked becomes the most widely used armored vehicle in history, not because it's invincible, because it's adaptable. Back in the United States, the last Shermans are finally retired from National Guard units in the 1950s, but they don't disappear. They become monuments, museum pieces, collector's items. Film stars Hollywood loves the Sherman because so many are available for war movies. Veterans return to them decades later, at reunions, at military museums. They run their hands over the armor, they climb inside and remember. Staff Sergeant Lafayette Poole, who lost his leg but survived the war, attends a tank battalion reunion in 1978. Someone has restored a Sherman to working condition. Poole climbs into the commander's hatch. He's 58 years old. His hands still remember where everything is. People always ask if I was scared, he tells a reporter. Every damn day. But you know what? This tank brought most of us home. The Germans had better tanks. We had better odds. The final accounting is impossible to calculate precisely. Over 49,000 Shermans were built. Approximately 20,000 were lost in combat, destroyed, knocked out, or abandoned. But those 20,000 tanks absorbed damage that would have killed crews in less survivable vehicles. They bought time for infantry, they drew fire, they held ground, and most importantly, they could be replaced. The Sherman's critics, both then and now, fixate on the wrong metrics. They compare armor thickness, gun penetration, and kill ratios. They call it a death trap. They argue that American crews died unnecessarily because of inadequate equipment. They're missing the point. The Sherman wasn't designed to be the best tank. It was designed to win the war. And winning required a tank that could be produced by the thousands, shipped across oceans, maintained by mechanics with minimal training, and operated by crews who could learn on the job. It required a tank that embodied American industrial philosophy, good enough, fast enough, and in overwhelming numbers. The Panther was a masterpiece. The Sherman was a weapon of mass production. In the end, only one of them was still running when the war ended. November 1979, Fort Knox, Kentucky, the Patton Museum of Cavalry and Armor. An elderly man stands in front of a restored M4A3 Sherman, his reflection ghosting across the worn steel. His name is Clarence Smoyer. In March 1945, he was a gunner in the 3rd Armored Division. His Sherman, nicknamed Eagle 7, fought through the streets of Cologne in one of the war's most documented tank battles. A young Army officer approaches. "Mr. Smoyer, can I ask you something? Was it true what they said, that the Sherman was a death trap?" Smoyer is quiet for a long moment, then he places his hand on the tank's hull. "Son, I was knocked out twice. Both times my crew got out alive. The second time, we were back in a new tank within 48 hours. He pauses. "You know how many German tankers got that chance?" The officer doesn't answer. He doesn't need to. This is the truth that statistics obscure and mythology erases. The Sherman's greatest strength wasn't its armor or its gun. It was that it kept its crews alive long enough to learn. And in armored warfare, experience is the deadliest weapon. German panzer crews in 1944 and 1945 were increasingly young, poorly trained replacements. The veterans, the men who conquered France and drove to the gates of Moscow, were dead, captured, or too broken to fight. Each destroyed Panther or Tiger represented not just lost equipment but lost expertise that couldn't be replaced. American Sherman crews, by contrast, became more lethal with each engagement. The same men who fumbled at Kasserine Pass in 1943 were ruthlessly efficient killers by 1945. They learned to work with infantry. They mastered combined arms tactics. They understood that the tank was just one piece of a larger system. Lieutenant Belton Cooper, a maintenance officer in the 3rd Armored Division, wrote a controversial memoir after the war titled Death Traps. It became the most frequently cited source for critics of the Sherman. Cooper described yards full of destroyed tanks, catastrophic fires, and wholesale slaughter. What Cooper didn't mention in his title, he was a maintenance officer. He saw every destroyed tank from every unit in the division. He never saw the thousands of Shermans that survived engagements, or the battles won, or the ground taken. His perspective, while valid, was skewed by his position. Combat veterans tell a different story. Sergeant Nicholas Mashlanek, another 3rd Armored Division tanker, fought from Normandy to Germany. He was knocked out 3 times. Each time, he and his crew escaped. Cooper saw the wrecks, Mashlanek said in an interview decades later. We saw the victories. The myth of the Sherman as a Ronson lighter persists because it makes for a compelling narrative. But the data contradicts it. Studies conducted after the war showed that Shermans caught fire after penetration at roughly the same rate as German tanks. The difference was that Sherman crews usually survived the initial hit and had time to bail out. The wet ammunition stowage introduced in 1944 reduced fire rates dramatically. The Sherman's ergonomic design, multiple escape hatches, and relatively spacious interior gave crews precious seconds. In a battle measured in milliseconds, those seconds meant life or death. But there's another layer to the story, a darker truth that both critics and defenders often miss. The Sherman killed its crews not because it was poorly designed, but because armored warfare itself is inherently lethal. Tank combat in World War II was butchery on an industrial scale. German, Soviet, British, and American tankers all died in horrifying numbers. The Sherman's casualties seem excessive only because America deployed so many of them. When you field 20,000 tanks in combat, even a low casualty rate produces thousands of deaths. Soviet T-34 crews had a life expectancy measured in weeks during 1941 and 1942. German Panther crews in 1944 faced constant mechanical breakdowns that left them stranded under Allied air attack. British Churchill tank crews fought in vehicles so slow they were nicknamed steel coffins by their own commanders. The Sherman's crews statistically had better survival rates than any of them. But America's relationship with casualties is different. The nation that produced 49,000 tanks expected them to protect their crews perfectly. When they didn't, when young men burned to death inside vehicles that were good enough, it felt like betrayal. That anger is valid. Every death in a Sherman represents a son who didn't come home, a husband who never met his daughter, a brother whose last moments were unimaginable pain. The crews who died deserved better. But better wasn't possible in 1944. Not with the industrial capacity available, not with the time constraints of fighting a two-front war, not with the technological limitations of the era. The choice wasn't between the Sherman and a perfect tank. The choice was between the Sherman and waiting another year to build something better while Nazi Germany controlled Europe and Japan controlled the Pacific. General George Patton, never one to mince words, said it plainly in 1945. The Sherman is the best tank we could build, ship, and field in the numbers we needed when we needed them. Could we have built a better tank? Sure. Could we have built 50,000 better tanks by 1944? No. By the 1950s, the Sherman was obsolete. By the 1960s, it was a relic. By the 1970s, it was a museum piece. But in 1944 and 1945, it was exactly what the war required, a reliable, maintainable, mass-producible vehicle that could be everywhere at once. The Germans laughed at it in 1942 because they were thinking about tank versus tank combat. They were thinking about engineering specifications and armor penetration tables. They were thinking like tankers. The Americans won because they were thinking about industrial capacity, logistics, crew survivability, and strategic mobility. They were thinking like a nation at war. The Sherman wasn't the best tank of World War II. It was the most important tank of World War II. There's a difference, and that difference won the war.